Web Marketing That Works podcast, episode 61, with Chris Ducker.
Welcome to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. Come behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments and listen in as amazing guests confess the truth about what really works. Now, here are your hosts, Adam Franklin and Toby Jenkins.
I'm Adam Franklin, and you are listening to the Web Marketing That Works podcast. This is the show for people who love marketing on the web. You'll be taken behind the scenes of real-life marketing experiments, and we look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. We confess what's failed and reveal the truth about what really works. Today's show is brought to you by our book, which is also called Web Marketing That Works, and it's brought to you specifically by the bonus 33 marketing templates that go with it. So they are all yours if you head over to bluewiremedia.com.au/book. And the guest for today's show is a gentleman called Chris Ducker, and he wrote a book called Virtual Freedom, which I actually did a podcast on. Episode 41 it is, if you want to go back and listen to it. I give a book review and share my highlights from the book. But this time I actually had a chance to speak to the man himself. And this was a great privilege because he was just telling me on the call that was his last podcast that he's going to do for at least a couple of months. He's had such a huge year last year that he's just taking a bit of time to focus on some new projects and get a bit of R&R this year. So if you don't know Chris, he is the author of the book, Virtual Freedom, and he came on my radar probably 12 months ago because he basically seemed to pop up on every single podcast that I listened to. He was everywhere, and he had his own podcast, and we talk about a bit about that in the show. His podcast was called Virtual Freedom, and it turns out that he was actually using that podcast to build an audience and to eventually help promote his book when it came out in April. So we dive into much more detail about that in the show. But Chris is an Englishman, and he now lives in the Philippines with his wife and family. He's been there over a decade, and he's really known around the traps as a virtual CEO, as Mr. Outsourcing in the Philippines, but there's so many other strings to his bow as well, and we dive into things like his podcasting career and everything else in the show. But he first came onto my radar at the Pro Blogger conference on the Gold Coast last year as one of the keynote speakers, and I really liked what he had to say, particularly about how his presentation was on the business of you and how to build your personal profile, which is something that I had seen and admired about Chris from afar. So to see him speak live and to meet him as well was a really big thrill. But I also decided to sign up to his mastermind, his one-day mastermind that he had running in Sydney a few months afterwards. So Tobes and I went along to that and spent a day with him, and we learnt a phenomenal amount about things that we wanted to learn about, like continuing to market our book, how to get good guests onto podcasts, how to break into, the American market when it comes to speaking and making connections over there as well. So there was a lot we learnt from Chris, and there was a lot that I wanted to talk with Chris about today. So I will let you hear the show. Let's get it started. Hi, it's Adam Franklin, and I'm very pleased to be joined on the line by Chris Ducker. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, mate. Pleasure.
Now, Chris, whereabouts are you tuning in from today?
I am in the Philippines, out of my home office.
Wonderful. Now, how's it been? You've been settling back into home life after a pretty whirlwind 2014?
It was kind of crazy, I knew going into last year that it was going to be one of those years that was just going to sort of fly by, and it did. It flew by, and I think, I'm ready to take it a little bit more easier this time. I did 46 airplanes last year. I had my PA put these handful of stats together. So I did 46 airplanes. I spoke in front of 12,000 people in something like 26 different cities around the world. And I stayed at something like 30 hotels or something. It was an insane year, but also very memorable and incredibly productive, believe it or not, in regards to just pure output, which is strange because a lot of people, myself included actually, are not usually that productive when they're on the road. But for some reason, I got a lot accomplished last year as well as doing all the travel. So it was good.
That's wonderful, because I was certainly one of the people that saw you actually twice in Australia, once at the Gold Coast for the Pro Blogger event, and then you flew back again for the Mastermind, and I certainly learnt a hell of a lot from you and from your book as well. So
cool.
I'm sure you're enjoying a bit of downtime, but can we quickly just recap a little bit about Virtual Freedom, the book, because I just found it so valuable, and a lot of our listeners of this show, Chris, are marketing people, but they're often like me, sometimes struggling with how do we keep up with all the different things that we should be doing. And as someone that teaches social media and web marketing, I'm always looking out for tips from people like you who really understand this outsourcing space so well. But firstly, can we just recap the idea of VAs and hiring outsourced talent to actually help with the things that you either don't like doing, things that you can't do, or things that you shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's the 3 lists of freedom right there that I talk about in the book, those 3 lists that you make, right out of the gate, right there in the introduction. And it pops up, as you know, several times throughout the course of the book, because that's the main core of where we are as entrepreneurs. We are stretched for time. I always say that time is our most valuable commodity, and it is. But the problem is, the majority of entrepreneurs in today's business world are working way too many hours. They're spending way too much time on stuff they should not be doing. In other words, somebody else can probably do it better than them. And, they're handling a lot of tasks that they maybe don't even like doing. But because their business is demanding them of them, they have to go ahead and do it. It's one of those things. So, outsourcing and just building a team, and it can be virtual or it can be sitting right there in your living room. It doesn't matter. Just, the sheer emphasis that I put on the importance of delegation to not only be productive, but also to truly boost your success level is very apparent. I mean, there's no way in the world that I could do everything that I do without my team of people, and likewise for other successful entrepreneurs as well. So I truly believe that, every entrepreneur will come to a fork in the road at some point, and they're going to either A, completely burn out.
Because that happened to you, right?
Well, that was me.
Yeah, right.
Late 2009, I hit that brick wall at 180 miles an hour, and it hurt a lot. And so I believe everybody will either come to a fork in the road, they'll either burn out because they continue to do everything themselves, or they switch a little bit. They start getting a little smarter, and they start looking at delegation and outsourcing and team building and hiring for the right roles and not necessarily reactively for tasks that need to be handled quickly. And once that happens, not only does that freedom come into play, but what you're ultimately doing as the business owner is you're buying time. I mean, you can buy time. It's called delegation. And so, I've just been a very big advocate of the whole virtual team building, concept, because it's helped me so much, both as an entrepreneur and obviously as just as a husband and a father as well.
Yeah, because since having read your book at least 6 or 8 months ago, whenever it came out last year, May or April, I think it was, Toby and I have been going through all the different roles that you do talk about being able to find somebody to fill. And I guess there's 7 of them that you specifically talk about in the book: a general virtual assistant, aka a GVA, but not to be confused with a super VA, right? There's no one VA that can do everything. But so you got a general VA that sort of what helps with all-round stuff, managing your team, but also general tasks. Is that right?
Yep.
And so then you've got also you've got web designers, graphic designers, search specialists, content creators, video and podcast editors, and if an app is appropriate, then an app developer. Yeah,
and there are other roles that you can outsource. Bookkeeping, accounting, these other more specialist roles. There's very, very, very few roles that you can't outsource today. Very few roles. I'm here in the Philippines, which is a bit of an outsourcing mecca, for want of a better term. And I know architects that have worked in the architectural field for 15 years here. They're in their mid to late 40s, some of them. And they are now working as a virtual architect or virtual draftsman or virtual CAD operators and making 3 times as much money as they would do by working for a local architectural firm.
Interesting.
But because, you know, the balance in salaries are so ridiculously wild in terms of the difference between, say, the United States and the Philippines, you know, the firms in America can pay 3 times what they would usually get paid here, and it's still a great deal. So everybody's happy.
Yeah.
And that's the way it works.
Now, what sort of tools and apps can people like us be using, Chris? Because, I mean, yes, it makes sense getting this virtual team, hiring them and using either Odesk or Elance or services like your own company where you actually match entrepreneurs up to virtual assistants. But assuming you find the right people for these different roles, what tools should we be using to help manage the teams?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, you know, in terms of when we're talking day-to-day management, I mean, good old-fashioned email and Skype is all you really need. But with that being said, you know, there are other types of, you know, project management systems such as, you know, Basecamp or Asana or Huddle or Teamwork BM. You know, these are project management solutions. These are SaaS products. So they're online. You access them via a web browser or mobile app on your device. And what they really do, I mean, like, I don't use them every day, but when I do use project management solutions or software, it's usually to actually manage a project. So a perfect example would be the redesign of a website. So let's say you've got a website that's been up and running a few years, it's looking a little dated, you want to give it a bit of a facelift, tweak some design, tweak some copy, that sort of type of thing. Well, you would hire several people to handle that project. You're going to hire a graphic designer, you're going to hire a developer, because they're 2 completely different roles, and that's one thing that a lot of entrepreneurs make that mistake and think that a web designer is actually a web developer as well. They know how to code. It's not the case 90% of the time. So, you know, you've got a graphic designer, web developer, maybe even a copywriter, and maybe if you're going to get real hardcore and social, you'd be looking at hiring a social media manager, not only for the interaction of social on your site, but also obviously to take the conversation off your site and onto social media as well. So let's say you've got 3, maybe 4 roles that people could be involved with. Now, if you're going to manage that project via email, your inbox is going to get hammered with all the emails going backwards and forwards. So with project management systems, it really allows you to have everything within one portal away from your inbox, so that you're becoming more and more focused when you're working on that product. But more importantly, it keeps all the noise in relation to that project away from your day-to-day work and out of your inbox, which is incredibly important because, you know, we have that shiny object syndrome, us entrepreneurs, where we'll get distracted very, very quickly. And before you know what's happening, whatever's on the schedule ain't getting done because you're looking at something you shouldn't be looking at just because it landed in your inbox. So that's the real reason behind project management systems for me. You know, my reporting, my management system is about as prehistoric as you can get day to day with my VAs. And literally all they do is send me an email at the end of each day with a bullet list of what they've done. And that enables me to look and read that very quickly. If I need to check anything elsewhere, I can do it based on that bullet list. And then I can also fire off a quick sentence in regards to those individual bullet points as well without any major issues. It takes me, and I kid you not, I have 2 full-time GVAs and I have 4 part-time VAs in various different roles, okay? But those 2 full-time GVAs are the only ones that I will really interact with day in, day out. But even that takes me less than 15 minutes for the 2 of them. Because unless there's something that we need to get on the Skype for, we just don't communicate via Skype. It's all done via that one email every day. Now, I also have a weekly meeting with my entire VA team every Thursday morning as well. So, you know, that's our time to have a general chit-chat discussion if we want. And then we also have Yammer set up, which is like Facebook for companies. I'm sure you've heard of it. Yammer's great. We've all got to have the same domain name email on there. But Yammer's just like Facebook. It looks and feels and works just like Facebook. But that's our virtual water cooler for our company. So that's where we do all the chit-chat and the gossip and the fun and the games and silly pictures and all that stuff. And I'll pop in there usually twice a week for 5 or 10 minutes and just interact with the team a little bit, whereas they're in there on and off throughout the course of the day. And I'm fine for them to do that because it fosters company culture. And it's important for me. The culture of my firm is really, really important. So even though I don't spend a lot of time in there, they love it. And I'd rather have them in there messing around, talking about a few bits and pieces business-wise than displaying it all to the world on the real Facebook, right? So, that's the way that I work with my VAs day to day. But ultimately, you're going to slide into whatever system works best for you. That just works best for me.
That's great. I mean, I'm certainly finding it incredibly liberating, and I'm not even as advanced as that. I'm still recruiting for a few virtual assistant roles. But in your situation, Chris, you've got all that stuff taken care of. So what does your typical day or week look like, and what projects are you really focusing on, given that you've got everything else taken care of? Like, what are the things that entrepreneurs and CEOs should be doing, and what are you doing personally?
Well, what we should be doing is things like strategizing for growth. I believe, the main focus of every business should be to grow. The moment you stop thinking about growing is the moment you hit a plateau and you become very stagnant. And that's something that I'm not interested in as a business owner. I'm always about growth, always. So I don't care what kind of growth that is. I just need to see growth. It can be monetary growth. It can be subscriber count growth. It doesn't matter what it is. I just want to see us progressing week in, week out, quarter in, quarter out. And so, I spend a lot of time in just sort of thought mode nowadays, which is a real blessing because I think it's something that is totally overlooked and completely underrated. I think that more and more business owners need to be in thought mode to be able to truly grow their businesses effectively. So, because of the management team that I have in place that kind of run the day-to-day side of the businesses for me, I get a lot of downtime to be able to think about strategizing for that growth, planning new product or service launches. As you know, I do a certain amount of travel, a certain amount of speaking, even though this year that's dropped considerably compared to last year on purpose, because this year is all about recalibrating and kind of just refocusing on the businesses a little bit more. But in my day-to-day, my wife calls me lazy.
Well, that's...
which is the biggest compliment
I was going to say that's huge.
With VAs can get, trust me, yeah. No, she does it a little tongue-in-cheek. You've met her, she's a good fun and all the rest of it. But no, it really does get to the point now where, my usual day starts at sort of 6 a.m. I get up, I do some form of exercise. It's either swimming or yoga, usually. Then I have my first cup of coffee for the day before the rest of the house wakes up. Then the house does wake up. On the odd occasion, every Tuesday morning, so we're recording this on a Tuesday morning, my time here, I usually have a couple of podcast interviews that I do. But other than that, I don't do any other interviews now. I just do a couple a week, and that's that. And then usually what will happen is I'll get to the point where I'm, just hanging out with the family before the little one goes to school. And then once he's gone at 12 noon is when he departs for school, I have 5 hours of unbridled quietness. And that's when I get my work done. And I do that Monday through to Thursday. I don't work Fridays anymore. I haven't actually for a couple of years. And, that's honestly my day. From time to time, I might have to hop onto Skype in the evening if I've got a call with the United States because of the time difference. But ultimately, that's kind of my day. It's a relatively simple setup. And one thing I'm really ridiculously OCD on is putting stuff on my schedule. So I have a saying that if it doesn't get scheduled, it doesn't get done. And so truly, honestly, everything that I need to do, whether it be replying to emails or spending time on social or writing a blog post or recording a podcast or whatever it is, it goes on the schedule. And I stick to the schedule like a lunatic, like a man possessed. And that's how I get what I need done every day.
And as you said earlier, you had produced so much content last year. You spoke, you traveled, you released a book. Last year was a huge growth year for you, and I certainly noticed you burst onto the scene. At least it appeared to burst on the scene. I understand there'd be a lot of work and effort as a foundation to enable that. But I want to talk a little bit quickly about, well, firstly, the podcast that you did with Mike Stelzner and Brian Clark in March last year on the Social Media Marketing Podcast. That was pivotal for me because in it, you were both talking about how launching a podcast can help you launch a product at the same time. And it was brilliant because up until that point, Toby and I had this plan to launch our book, and then a few months later, once the dust had settled, launch our podcast. And I remember listening to your chat with Mike Stelzner. It was 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep, and I just decided to throw this on. And there you were both saying, if you're about to launch a product, especially a book, launch a podcast at the same time, preferably a few weeks or a month in advance, and then launch them both together. And that was just such a pivotal moment for our book launch. But can you talk us through how that worked for you and what you'd recommend to people who are launching a product?
Yeah, I mean, look, and that call was also pivotal for me as well because it validated the wild move that I took in kind of, putting way much more pressure on myself around the book. I mean, launching a book is a lot of work. And, we were pushing for a New York Times bestseller. We didn't quite get the numbers we needed. We weren't too far off, which is comfort in itself. But, we were going for it big time. And because of the network that I have and the friends that I've been able to acquire and foster those relationships and the 5 years that I've been active online, we gave it a really, really good shot. So there was a lot of hard work involved there. But when I was on that call with Brian and Mike, now you got to understand, Brian and I, up until that call, not only we never met, we'd never spoken.
That is awesome.
Right? So Mike reached out to me and said to me, would you like to do a podcast? Would you like to come on the podcast and talk about how you're utilizing a podcast to help launch your book? I said, yeah, sure, no problem. And then a day later, he came back and said, I've got Brian Clark to come on, and we're going to talk about how he's doing it to launch Rainmaker for the product. And I said, oh, great. I've never met Brian before. This is cool. So, and now, by the way, just as a caveat to that, Brian and his company, Copyblogger Media, are now in the process of the complete refurb and redevelopment of chrisducker.com as a result of that call.
Wow.
So it's funny how things go. Right? But the reason why I went with a podcast was, and a lot of people haven't quite grasped onto this concept yet, so I'm going to try and be as simple as I possibly can in wording this. iTunes, just like YouTube and Google, is a search engine, but it's a different kind of search engine. It's a search engine where millions and millions and millions of people have already inputted their credit card details. That's fact, right? So when you're creating content for an audience that is used to purchasing whatever it is online, it might be movies, an app, music, whatever. When you're creating content for people that are used to purchasing online, it becomes easier to sell to them online over and over again, obviously. And as a podcaster for 5 years now, I'll be celebrating 5 years in April, actually. As a podcaster for 5 years, I knew the power behind getting somebody to literally insert you into their eardrums, right? Like I knew how powerful that connection was. And I also had a ton of questions coming in with the run-up of the launch of the book. I had a ton of questions coming in from people on one aspect or another, working with virtual assistants or building virtual teams or apps or, anything, right? And so, you know what, I'm going to take the top 25, and I had one of my VAs curate everything and put together a list of 25 topics or questions or problems that needed answers and solutions. And then I basically, over a period of a 2-day period, I blocked out my calendar and I recorded 25 podcast episodes of around 8 to 10 minutes a pop and got it done. Dropped all that into Dropbox, had my audio editor bumper it with intro and outro music and all the rest of it. And then, boom, we had 25 episodes ready to go. And the plan was to launch. We launched with 5 episodes right out the gate, hit right at the top of New and Noteworthy in business straight away, enjoyed some really good download traffic and some solid shares on social for that month running up to the book launch. So we were dripping content out. I think by the time the book actually came out, which was April 1, we had, I believe, about 17 or 18 episodes already go live. So there was lots of buzz. And then once the book hit, we carried on dripping the content out through to around, I think, the 25th or 26th of April, where we hit the episode 25. And it was announced in episode 1 that it was going to be a limited, what I was calling a nano podcast, right? A little podcast. It was going to be a little podcast, and it was going to be limited to 25 episodes. And then episode 25, we said, this is the last one. And then there was a great big fat call to action that said, buy the damn book. And it worked. It worked. We're coming up to, I believe there's just over 30,000 copies sold now. And, you know, we hit #1 bestseller in 4 different categories on Amazon.com. And, you know, every day I wake up to either an email or a tweet or a message on Facebook or something where somebody is sharing what the book has done to them and their business. And it's just, you know, it's heartwarming to hear all that kind of feedback.
Okay, so that's a great blueprint for anyone listening who's about to launch a book or another book or an ebook or anything really. So
it's not rocket science either. You know, that's the thing. It's honestly, if I can come up with this, anybody can. It's not that tough to put this into play. What it really comes down to, man, it comes down to just a little bit of planning, but with the focus being on the execution of that plan, because as entrepreneurs, we procrastinate until the cows come home, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important that when we put something on the schedule or we put a plan in place, that there has to be very definable goals, very definable milestones that you hit. In other words, I'm going to launch this March 1 with 5 episodes. If March 2 comes along and you haven't launched with 5 episodes, you failed.
Yeah.
And it's important to have those very, very definable goals and ticking points written down somewhere in front of you so you can review and revise them every day. You know, again, it ain't rocket science. It just comes down to execution and taking action at the end of the day.
So what has failed with you, Chris? So you've got that really good blueprint we've just said about promoting a product or a book through that podcast. You've been active online for over 5 years and very prolific in what you've done. At various points, there must have been some types of failures. What has failed, and can you share what you've learnt from those?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, by all means, I've not got everything right. That's for damn sure. Oh, God. I mean, there was a couple. I'm trying to think, a couple more content related. Okay, so at first I started blogging 3 times a week, which was manageable. And I understand this is 5 years ago. That was very normal 5 years ago. It was almost like if you're not blogging 3 times a week, you ain't going to get anywhere as a blogger. So we started out like that. And then I dropped it back. After about a year, I dropped it back to about twice a week. By then, I'd already built out a half-decent community, so it wasn't really hurting me numbers-wise or anything. But then for some reason, I figured, you know what? I'm going to go daily.
Oh,
catastrophe. Complete. What was I thinking? That was absolute madness to think I could do that and get away with it. I think I did it for like 3 weeks and eventually caved in and said, this is madness. But the thing is, you put it out there, right? Oh, this could be a daily blog. And then when you stop, people know why. Yeah, it was a total failure. But I think the biggest failure that I've made online in the last 5 years was in I think it was late 2012, I launched a new service-related business called YourWebPA.com, which is now dead and buried, so don't bother checking it out. But YourWebPA was, you know, it was a brainchild that came out of, to be very frank with you, my own ego. At that point, I had very firmly staked the claim as the outsourcing guy in the Philippines. I still have it now, but it's not something that I push for anymore. It's naturally happened now. But back in those days, it was 3 years ago.
Internet years.
I know, right? Yeah. You know, but back in the iPhone 3 days,
yeah,
or whatever it was, No, but I honestly, I drank my own Kool-Aid, man. I thought, this is a service that people are going to eat up. It's going to be like Elance, but by using Chris Ducker's team. So I had a team of VAs in the office, and we're doing everything from ebook design to transcription work to web design tweaks, you name it. We were doing it all, basically. But obviously at a markup. Because we're a business, we've got to make money. And, other than transcription and ebook designs, which were not the most profitable, we hardly got any business. And the reason why was because people could get the work done cheaper on bloody Elance or Odesk or one of the other, job posting outsourcing sites out there. So I did. I drank my own Kool-Aid, and I thought it was going to be the best thing since sliced bread, and it was a total failure. I don't know the exact dollar amount that I lost, but I would say probably close to 20 G's all in, because we were in beta for a while. I mean, these people weren't just hired for a 6-month period before I decided to close those virtual doors. They were on staff for about a year, building it up, training, putting operating manuals in place, management costs, you name it. Not to mention things like office space and all the rest of it. So, it was a total and utter failure. I pulled the plug after 6 months, and I'm highly embarrassed talking about it now. But it just goes to show you that nothing runs smoothly. And regardless of how well you might be doing in one particular area of business, it doesn't mean you're going to be, the golden child in every area. But I tell you what, though, going through that failure was very humbling. And it brought me back down a little bit, and it was worthwhile. In the grand scheme of things, it was worthwhile.
Yeah, if it keeps you on your toes, then that certainly sounds like difficult at the time. But
I'll tell you, nothing keeps me on my toes more than losing money. I can tell you that right now.
I bet. Now, one thing I'm excited to have a chat with you about is what's next on the marketing front for you. And I mean, when we were speaking in Sydney last year, you were saying there was something big on the horizon, but you wouldn't bloody tell us what it was. And of course, now that we're in 2015, there's this new project, and I'd love you to spend a bit of time talking us through what you've been working on for so long and what it's all about.
Sure. Well, I'm not going to give you too many specifics because it's actually not out until the beginning of quarter 3.
Oh,
so
I was thinking it was the podcast.
No. So we do have the podcast with myself and Pat, which was the One Day Business Breakthrough, and we can certainly talk about that, no problem. And that, there's 2 or 3 big projects this year. Okay. That was the first one.
Okay, that's what I thought it was.
Yeah, there you go. See, I got more feathers in my cap than that, mate.
You do, Chris. Are you keeping me on my toes?
No, so quarter 3 is all about my online membership community. It's something that I've been wanting to do for a couple of years, but I procrastinated, quite frankly, for a couple of reasons. Obviously, the book came about. 2013 was all about writing and editing the thing. 2014 was all about marketing the book. Welcome to the world of traditional publishing. And then, it's just everything else comes into play, the travel and everything else that goes along with it. And if I'm to be very honest with myself and with you and your listeners, fear as well. Is this needed? Will people pay for it? Is it a good idea? Do people, want for this? The usual issues that we have when we're coming up with new ideas, when we're asking ourselves whether something is worth pursuing or not. And all those thoughts and feelings and emotions have run rabid in the last couple of years. But thanks to some good mentorship from my own mentors and friends and colleagues, I have decided to go ahead and do it. The time is right. I do have a good online community already, and so we will be launching that in the 3rd quarter of this year, and it will be a paid membership community, but it's going to be very, very different. It's not just all going to be about sort of monthly webinars and, a forum. You know what I mean? There's going to be a lot more involved, and as you know, I'm a big believer in spending real quality time with people. And so a big part of the membership is going to be focused around live events, in-person events, and it's going to be interesting to see how it unravels. So I'm looking forward to unleashing that later on in the year.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I'll be keeping a close eye on that. Now let's talk a little bit about the podcast, because I went to your mastermind, the in-person mastermind in Sydney last year, and loved it. And you've taken that concept, I guess, and turned it into a podcast with Pat Flynn, where you go through that exact same process and what listeners call in and present their biggest challenge or opportunity, and you guys just break it down and have a good time doing so.
Yeah, I mean, so this all started back in, 2000, late 2012 or early 2013. I can't quite remember now. I think it was early 2013. And Pat and I are good buddies. So when I was over in the US, we always talk about what we could potentially do together, a product, a service, a membership site, a course, whatever. And, we were both in agreement that we wanted to do something with each other, but we couldn't quite agree on what. And so, like I said, I was due to fly into the US. We were going to hang out in San Diego. And I said, well, when I'm there, let's do a mastermind for our communities. And I've already been doing them since, early 2012 for my own community, just like the one that we did in Sydney, right?
Yeah.
No, Melbourne?
No, Sydney was the one I went to.
Sydney, right, okay.
Yeah.
So, I'd already been doing them for a year or so on my own. So this is what we can do. This is how we can do it. What do you say? He said, yeah, sure, let's do it. So we called it the One Day Business Breakthrough, and we didn't even really think about it a whole lot. And we ended up doing 6 or 7 of these things. And we actually did one in the Gold Coast last year with when we were there for the Pro Blogger event, and that sold out very quickly. And so we've done a whole bunch of these, and that was actually the catalyst. That the Aussie version, when we were done, we sat down and we said, you know what, we've got to take this to the next level. Like, we're helping so many people. We're having so much fun doing it. We got to move this up. And knowing full well that I wasn't going to be in the US all that much this year, we decided that the way to be able to do it on a much bigger scale would be to do a podcast. Because one thing that we had noticed is that even though we were working on the business of the person that was in the hot seat at that point, so everybody got 15 minutes at the live event, and that's a format we now continue with the podcast, but we noticed that not only did the person in the hot seat get a ton out of those sessions, but also everybody else in the room, because you get this cross-fertilization of ideas and problem solving when you get a bunch of entrepreneurs together. You might be running a marketing company and someone else could have a dog training company, but I guarantee you're suffering from the same pains in some way, shape, or form. So we realized that was the case. When this is the way to help people, on a mass scale, is to do a podcast, because we're both podcasters. We both love the medium. And so we went ahead and did it. But we still wanted to do the live events because we personally had a lot of fun with them. And so we're doing that again, April 24. We have a live event in San Diego. And this time round, we're actually setting it up to be able to live stream it around the world via the web. So there'll be 2 types of tickets, whereas before it was just in-person only. This time it's in-person as well as an online passport ticket as well. And so, we can't wait. And we've taken the entire brand up to the next level. We're having a lot of fun doing it as well.
Awesome. Now, Chris, who do you learn from?
It changes. It changes every year, actually. I mean, I'm always reading books and that sort of type of thing, but I made a rule about, maybe 4 or 5 years, but maybe 4 years ago, where I was going to follow 3 influencers online each year and follow them very closely, not kind of stalker-ish,
but pretty close.
But pretty close to stalker-ish. But no, just really follow what they did, how they did it, why they did it, and all that sort of stuff. So I will subscribe to their email newsletters. I will follow them on Twitter. I will like their Facebook pages. I'm sounding like a stalker now, aren't I? I will, if I get the opportunity to, I will have them come on the podcast. Sometimes they know that they're one of my 3 influencers of the year. Sometimes they don't. And it's up to me in regards to the relationship that I build with them at that time. But one person that has been on the list every single year since I started doing this, and I put the list together around November, December for the following year, right? So one person that's been on the list every year since I've started doing it has been Richard Branson. Just so much to learn from the guy, and I'm just a continuous sponge for what he puts out. So I'll follow him on Instagram. I'll read his blog. I'll watch his YouTube videos. I'll read his entrepreneur column. I'll do anything I can to really, obviously his books are a given.
Fly to Necker Island.
Yeah, you just got to consume them, right? Plain and simple. And then, every year there's a couple of spots that rotate. And so, people that was following last year are no longer being followed this year. I mean, I've already got relationships with them. And so that's the other thing is I don't just pick an influencer or a quote-unquote virtual mentor, I guess, to learn from, but also build relationships with them as well. And I'm blessed to be able to have a very, very nice network of people that I can call genuine friends now because of it.
Okay, so a really deep dive into a couple of people to see what makes them tick and learn as much from that, I guess.
Yeah, because otherwise we're just consuming content all the time, aren't we?
Yeah.
When we're producing anything ourselves, I mean, it's easy to spend 3-4 hours a day reading blog posts and listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos, but it ain't going to make any money in the grand scheme of it. You've got to take action. You've got to produce yourself. And so, there has to be a line that you draw. Like I said, with me, I do 2 podcast interviews a week. And in fact, actually, you're the last one until probably July.
Wow.
Like I'm actually taking a sabbatical. This is my last one of January and the last one right the way through to July because I got other projects I want to work on. So it just goes to show you, you put these things in place, and like I say, you pull the trigger, and then you've got to work towards them. And I think that we could spend so much time consuming content if we weren't, careful with that. And so I'm all about really just focusing on a couple of people, and those influences are usually very closely tied in to what I want to achieve this year coming. So, for instance, for me this year, my membership community is important. So one of my 3 influencers runs an extremely profitable, productive, and very successful online membership community. And he's not related to the business space at all. He's in the health and fitness space, but I'm consuming everything he puts out, even though the topic, yes, it's interesting, but it's not something that really gets me pumped up and turned on. But what he's really doing is he's giving me, by being on his list, by seeing what he's doing, he's given me a virtual masterclass in how to nurture a paid community.
By observing what he's doing, yeah.
Exactly. And he has no idea.
Yeah, yet.
Not yet.
Not yet, yeah. Soon he'll be on your show and you'll be best buddies with him, but as for now, he's in the getting stalked category.
There you go, yeah.
Hey, Chris, are there any closing thoughts or any final piece of advice or anything you'd like to get off your chest before we bring this interview to a close?
No, mate. I mean, you've done a good job. It was a fun chat, and I hope I dropped a few value bombs along the way. But I mean, really what I'm trying to advocate here more than anything else is that you don't need to do it all by yourself. Building a team is really, it's I believe it's the nucleus for every piece of success that a business will, come across. I don't feel the need to have to do everything myself anymore, whereas I did before. And it's got to the point now where if something lands on my desk or pops into my inbox, it comes down to me now saying, can someone else do this for me? It's not me being that micromanaging, typical, type A entrepreneur. It's a rewarding feeling because a lot of us struggle with that. And until you start letting go and until you start experiencing buying time and, really utilizing that extra time that you get for the business growth, you don't really know how it feels. So I suggest that everybody just starts delegating bit by bit, slowly but surely, and, let me know how it all goes. I'd love to hear from anybody tuning in. Awesome. And what's the best way that listeners can connect with you or contact you? Well, everything I do online is on my blog, so chrisducker.com, or I'm a big Twitter user, as you know, so @ChrisDucker. Perfect. Well, Chris, thank you on behalf of our listeners, and thank you from me and Toby. We've certainly learned a lot from your book, from your podcasts, and from you in person. So we really appreciate your generosity and everything that you share. And you have yourself a great day. I will do that. Thank you very much for having me on. It was all my pleasure. Thank you. And that's a wrap from my chat with Chris Ducker. I enjoyed that. And my 3 take-home lessons from that is firstly that we are not alone. So there is help out there in the form of virtual assistants, aka VAs,
that can help with admin, that can help with editing, that can help with graphics and Facebook updates and all these other things that, yes, we definitely need to be doing in our business, but it doesn't necessarily, and it shouldn't necessarily, be us. If we're the entrepreneur, the business owner, the marketing manager, these are all tasks that can be outsourced to people who, one, love doing it, and two, most likely much better than us at actually doing the tactical execution of it. It was interesting that he talks about the superhero syndrome, because I certainly sometimes feel myself that, there's so many things that we need to be doing. It's easy to get trapped into thinking that you're the superhero that's just got to go through and do all these little things yourself. And you end up, not complaining about it, but it stops you doing the work that you really should be doing. And I've certainly found it very liberating having read Virtual Freedom last year, and Tobes and I have been in the process of filling a lot of our virtual assistant roles. We've always had web designers and web developers and copywriters and what have you, but in recent times we've taken on a search specialist and a podcast editor and a graphics creator and a blog editor. So all these tasks that we used to do that we no longer have to. And not only does it free up more time, but it means that we can actually not get bogged down in some of the detail, and it allows us to focus on the more high-value tasks like content creation or interviewing people on the podcast or creating templates or courses to help people. And Chris made a very good point that it allows him time to think. And I guess that's the second take-home point from the podcast, was that as business owners, entrepreneurs, marketers, whatever, we do need time to think. And I actually personally find running or going for a walk, it doesn't have to necessarily be running, but getting outdoors and just thinking, because that's one time when you're not distracted by a computer or your phone or a monitor or whatever, you can actually just take time to think about the stuff that you've been writing about or reading about. And I actually find a lot of my ideas and clarity comes from when I'm just out, either just without listening to anything, but very often listening to podcasts or listening to audio books, because your brain does just have time to just compute all the stuff that you're thinking about. And I personally made a goal this year to read for 1 hour every day. And I've really enjoyed it so far. I don't know how many books I've read so far, and we're only in the end of January, but I will be keeping a list. I will be making a list and reporting back on Twitter and on my blog as to how that's going. But I really do find taking the time to read, taking the time to go for a walk or a run and listen to podcasts and audiobooks gives me that time to think. And that is a luxury when you do have help in the form of virtual assistants. And my final take home was something Chris said very late in the interview about consumption of content versus the creation of content. And of course, there's an infinite amount of information on the web, and spending all your time consuming, reading, listening, whatever it might be, watching videos, can easily just be a form of procrastination. But he suggests that as business owners and marketers, we really need to be spending that time to be creating stuff, because obviously you can't, even if we read for the rest of our life, we wouldn't even scratch the surface of all the information available to us online. So yes, learn, read, but don't spend your entire day doing that, because it is a form of procrastination. Do what you need to, definitely learn and read every day, but then do the important, difficult work of then turning that into some type of content yourself, something you can then share with the world and publish online. So the 3 takeaways: avoid the superhero syndrome and get help, take time to think, and I personally try and read for an hour a day or go for a walk or a run, and thirdly, create content. Don't always fall into the trap of consuming it. This show was brought to you by our book called Web Marketing That Works and the 33 marketing templates that go with it. So you can get your hands on those at bluewiremedia.com.au/book. And I appreciate all of your feedback and questions. If you have any, please let me know via email. I'm adam.franklin@bluewiremedia.com.au, or simply tweet me at Franklin_Adam. If you enjoyed the show, and I hope you did, it would mean a lot to us if you could take the time to leave an honest review on iTunes. It helps us get a lot more visibility so that we can attract good quality guests like Chris onto the show. So thank you for listening through to the end, and I'll see you next time.